and I am so excited to talk to her this evening about equine bodywork. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. Well, before we dive right in, if you are attending live, as always, feel free to put any questions that you have for Rebecca in the chat, and I will relay those to her. And I mean, I know we got some questions in advance that are like really on this topic of equine bodywork and diving right in. I do want to start by learning a bit more about you, though, just to maybe
Yeah,
set the stage. Can you just tell us a bit about your background in your words and where you're located and just kind of like a brief bio on yourself?
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it kind of depends on how far back you want to go, but so I, grew up riding and all of that. Did 4-H with my minis and rode hunter jumpers. Started working at barns and ended up managing a few different facilities. And then I went to school for massage therapy for people just about 10 years ago now. So I became licensed for people in 2015. Um, and then a couple years after that, I did my first certification for horses, thinking I would just work on, my lease horse and friends' horses and all of that. But coming from a human background, I was like, oh, that wasn't quite the in-depth anatomy and biomechanics that I wanted. So I took another course and then another course. And then about 6 years ago, my business transitioned to horses full time. So I've been working on horses full time for the past 6 years. I'm based in southern New Hampshire, so like New Hampshire seacoast area, but kind of travel. I mean, really, I'd go anywhere, but most of my clients are within about an hour of me.
Super cool. And I mean, the
Yeah.
shift from like or massage therapy to equine, like that's a
Yeah.
big pivot. I guess
Yeah.
is that something, I mean, kind of what inspired, like what made you do that?
I mean, it was kind of like it was really a natural transition for me because I had been working on people and then at the same time was still working part-time in some barns. And then, yeah, started practicing on friends' horses. And then it kind of went from there. It's like more and more people became interested in it. So working as an independent contractor for people, I was able to do this too. But I kind of just like cut back what, you know, really just shifted shifted my schedule. So it became more horses, less people, and then eventually it was 100% horses. So um, yeah, that's where I'm at.
It's really cool. And I think, I
Yeah,
mean, the horses benefit from that. So
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
wonderful. Can you tell us about a bit more about the certifications that you hold in equine massage and how did each certification shape your approach to equine bodywork?
Yeah, so equine bodywork, and this is something Kara and I had talked about beforehand, but might be another question that comes up too. But equine massage is not regulated in the same way that human massage is. So for human massage, you have to be licensed to be practicing. Equine massage, you don't. And typically, like the programs for equine massage are not nearly as in depth as what I received education wise from the human background. Um, so, for instance, my human program was a 750-hour program. So I did that over a year. And I can't quite remember, but at least 100, it was like between 100 to like 200 something of those hours is clinical practice hours. So you're getting a ton of hands-on experience, and all 750 of those hours are in person. Whereas the equine classes, there are a lot of different options for certification courses. Some of them are just online. Some of them are weekend classes. Some of them are, in person for a week. And it just really varies. But typically they're about, I think, at least two of the programs that I've done off the top of my head have been 40 hours for the equine, which is, it's a good intro, but it's not 750 hours. um, and, I find that like the in-person classes are really, really crucial because you can't really teach by reading, you know, palpation and what you're feeling. And you can read about where the muscles are, but actually feeling where they, you know, insert and, you know, connect and seeing how they move is a totally different thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm trying to envision learning how to become like a bodywork expert or a massage therapist virtually. And like, I'm struggling with the
Yeah.
idea. Like, that just, like, it's all about, it's literally feel. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really hard. I've had some folks reach out to me before who have been in online programs and had questions and, you know, just needed somebody to chat with. And they were like, how do you, you know, you can feel really lost, especially when you're not in an in-person or group setting. And really like the best way to develop that feel and develop your skill is to get out there and get your hands on horses. You know, the more bodies you come into contact with, the more you're going to develop your skill for palpation.
yeah. Which certifications did you decide were important to you?
So I didn't necessarily have like a ton of information about like specifically which ones I wanted to do. I did the ones that like came up and were most accessible, at least for the first one. So I wouldn't necessarily like recommend the ones that I did in comparison to other programs. I think typically I'd recommend that, um, you know, if somebody's getting into the field or interested in it, my recommendation would be to be prepared to take more than one certification program, because I really feel like all three of the programs that I did like together have given me a really good basis. But if I had just done one, I would have been lacking in some of the education that I have. So I really, you know, I loved the second certification that I did, which was in person, with Joanne Wilson, who teaches what's called the Wilson Marr method. And she works with the US equestrian team. And that was in person for a week. So, and it was a small group. I think there were, I think between 5 and 7 people there. So you get a lot of hands-on time, and she's also just like a really good teacher. So we got to go out to a lot of different farms, see a lot of different horses, interact with clients. And especially for me and how I learned, that really helped and kind of made things stick. And she would, you know, she'd do things like, which we also did in my human program, like come up to a horse and actually draw on their body where the muscles are. So, you know, all of those things really just help connect everything. But yeah, I think overall, if people can get into a program that has a hands-on portion and do a couple different programs, that's probably what will set them up for success the most.
Yeah. Super interesting.
Yeah.
That seems like it would be really valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you've continued to pursue further education in equine rehabilitation, stretching techniques, and kinesiology taping. How
Yeah.
do these modalities complement your massage therapy work?
Yeah, I have loved the continuing ed that I've done. So the rehab stuff I think is, you know, kind of crucial to have if you want to be a you know, member of the horse's team. I can't prescribe anything, but I can make recommendations based on what I'm feeling in the horse's body, or based on, you know, say we have a horse that's rehabbing from a certain injury. I can work with the vet and kind of brainstorm what exercises might be best for that specific case. So the rehab's been great for that. It's also been great for, you know, some people refer to it as like prehab. So making sure the horse's body is stronger so that they're not as prone to injury. So it's really just given me more tools for my toolbox and more things to like pull from. And it, you know, a horse doesn't necessarily have to have injuries, but everybody, horses, humans, we all have like, you know, our favorite sides, like, or areas that we are either stronger or compensate more. And the more we know about different exercises to target those areas, the more we can kind of help improve our overall balance.
Mm-hmm.
And then the kinesiology tape has been great because it's something I can, you know, offer in addition to the body work to kind of help the basically help the results of the body work stretch out between sessions. Or there's some tape applications that I can do that, kind of going along the same vein as like the rehab stuff. We can work with developing the horse's proprioception in different areas and actually helping them change their movement or posture with different applications.
Really cool. I'm Googling what proprioception is.
Oh yeah. So that's basically just like awareness of where the body is in space is like the simplified version. Yeah. So like, for instance, if you have a horse who's like not picking up one leg as much as the other, you can do a tape application that kind of just brings awareness to where that limb is. And then they will, flex more through, for instance, like hawk, stifle, fetlock, whatever, depending on where the tape is applied. So you're just bringing awareness to that area, and they just become a little bit more of like, oh, I know where that limb is. I'm gonna, move it more efficiently, or have that awareness of where it is in space and where it's interacting with the ground and landing.
Yeah. It seems like there'd be a lot of applications of that. That's super.
Yeah, that's why it's so fun, because it's like it just gets your wheels turning. Like everything new, you're like, ooh, I could kind of brainstorm how to help the specific case and scenario. And every horse is going to respond a little bit differently too.
Yeah. The next kind of section of questions is related to like body work techniques. Before we jump into that, I'm curious, like, as a baseline, are most horses experiencing some sort of like body pain that we're not aware of, or is that like the exception that you need to, that like obviously in all cases you should try to resolve it, but I'm just wondering, like, are there like kind of like cricks in every horse that is like very baseline, that's like standard for these animals, or is that not baseline?
Yeah, I would say most of them, like I can't really speak to whether or not they're actually experiencing pain with those things, but I'd say most of them have some sort of like discomfort or slight dysfunction. And that doesn't mean that there's an injury or anything, severely wrong. That's just like a natural result of life and living in a body and moving through the world. We all have different imbalances. But if those things go unaddressed, that's typically when we, can run into some issues.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, so let's dive into the foundational techniques. What are the key techniques or practices that form the foundation of equine massage therapy?
So do you mean like actual, like what I'm doing with my hands, or?
I guess, yeah, what you're doing with your hands, like are there like modalities that are like very much just like the core modalities of equine massage?
Yes, and also I feel like they kind of like tie in together. So, for instance, like with my human massage course, we had like so many different modalities that we learned separately, but then in a session you might apply multiple modalities. So for people, you might have learned like lymphatic massage techniques, trigger point techniques, Swedish massage techniques. So those are all different modalities, but I'm not necessarily going to go in thinking that I'm going to use just one modality in a session. So there are practitioners who specialize in, for instance, working with the fascial or connective tissue in the body. So like doing myofascial work, and like equine fascial integration and stuff. So I do massage. So I'm working on the actual muscle tissue, but because I'm working on the body and the muscle tissue surrounded by fascia, I'm also affecting the fascial system. So I don't really, like I said, I don't really like kind of stick to any one technique in a session, but typically like I'll work with like lighter pressure to start, for instance, but then I might use like direct pressure or trigger point therapy if I find a specific spasm in the muscle. So what that looks like is, pardon me, so that could be like I'm actually using like the tips of my fingers on a spasm and kind of like holding and putting some pressure there. And sometimes I'll actually feel it under my fingertips release, and other times I'll kind of like take my hand away and then see if we can break that up a little bit, or I'll use cross fiber friction, so moving across the muscle fibers to see if we can get them to unstick, basically. So yeah, those would be kind of like words for what you're actually doing with your hands. So direct pressure, things like kneading or compression, or tapping, like a lot of times, you know, on some of the bigger muscle groups, like the gluteal muscles on a horse, because they're enormous. To increase the circulation there, I'll do like some tapping with a loose fist. So yeah, things like that. Does that answer your question? Oop, I think I lost you. Uh-oh. Oh, there you are.
Sorry
I lost
about
you
that.
for a second there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Huh. Okay, hold on. Oh, you can hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay. Amazing. Well, good. Yeah, sorry. I was hearing from some people in the audience that they couldn't hear me, and so I clicked something and it lost our recording for a second, but I'm glad that we're back. Okay, that was a wonderful explanation.
Okay.
And the next question is, how do the needs of a backyard companion differ from those of an upper level competition horse in terms of body work? And does that differ depending on discipline as well?
That's a great question. So, you know, typically, whether it's a backyard kind of companion type horse or a horse that's in upper level work, it really is like individual basis. So a horse that's not really doing much and is in the backyard might be dealing with some compensation issues within their own body, but they're probably not dealing with the additional, you know, things that we ask of them, like the jumps that we may be jumping or the tack that we may be putting on them, or all of those different things that also can create some compensation or muscle tightness. So they might need or benefit from, you know, body work on some sort of like routine but less frequent schedule, versus a horse that's in upper level competition may be on a much more frequent schedule.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And do horses that are like, I mean, the horses that are experiencing cross country versus horses that are experiencing dressage, are their body work needs really different just because what we're asking of them is really different?
So their body work needs may not be different. Like they may be on very similar schedules, but they may have different patterns of muscle tightness. So for instance, like hunter jumpers, a lot of time, and this is like my experience and what I've found with my client horses, like other people may have found some different patterns, but horses that are jumping a lot often have like really tight shoulders because, you know, they're putting a lot of force on their shoulders and base of their neck and thoracic sling as they're landing over fences. Dressage horses often have a lot of tension in, you know, some of their hind end muscles. So adductors, the muscles inside the hind limb, the hamstrings, their gastrocnemius, which is the muscle just above the hock, because they have to do, you know, a lot of using that hind end when they're doing those upper level movements. And then just kind of going back to your backyard companion horses, or some of your like retirees or horses that may be a little bit out of shape. I find that they often will have a little bit of tension, like either end of their spine, so their low back and then just behind their withers. And the reason for that is because they don't really have that core strength lifting their lifting their back up. So it's kind of like both ends of, if you think of the back as like a suspension bridge, it's like those are the 2 points that are holding it up. So that's where there's going to be a little bit of tension, and that's not, you know, that's a totally normal thing. And once you increase core strength, it typically improves.
Yeah, totally. Are there common signs that people can look out for that a horse might benefit from massage therapy or body work? And basically how can an owner recognize when their horse needs some help?
Yeah, I mean, it can be so many things. Basically anything that is a little out of the norm, or even things that you might think are normal that actually aren't. So for instance, like under saddle, if you're having difficulty picking up one lead versus another, if the horse is hanging a leg over fences, whether that's a hind leg or a front leg, if they're scuffing a toe, if they're pulling shoes, if they're, a little bit back sore or girthy or, flinchy when you put the saddle on, if they have a difficulty, whether it's through the back and through their barrel and rib cage or through the neck, but if they have difficulty bending one way versus another, if they're heavier on one rein or another. So those are all really good clues.
Got it. And what's your, I mean, I feel like a lot of horses, like people are like probably listening, like, oh my gosh, like
I know
all of those symptoms.
I mean, they all have something, like we as people all have something too, it doesn't mean, again, it's like not to scare people or say it's a bad thing. It's just a normal part of existing in a body. We're going to have some stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Especially as athletes too. It's like,
absolutely.
So as you kind of think about like when you're first going to a new client's farm and assessing what the needs are for those horses, where do you start? Can you kind of walk us through that initial kind of observation that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first come to a horse, I mean, I will either have already had a client fill out an intake form, or we'll be going over it verbally at the session, but I ask a lot of questions. So I'm going to be asking about anything and everything, and you might not even realize that it's relevant to, how your horse's body is going to feel. So it's going to be about, what's their turnout like? How many hours a day are they outside? When was their saddle last fit? Discipline, frequency of work, what are they eating? How often do they have hay? Do they eat out of a hay net? Do they eat off the ground? Are they out with friends? Are they out alone? All of those things. And then when I am actually looking at the horse, I'll have the owner walk them to start. So I like to start by walking them in a straight line. And then we can do like a more in-depth gait analysis, but typically like you can see a lot of things at a walk. So the slower they go, the harder it is for them to kind of use momentum to use those compensation patterns they've developed and like cheat through the movement. So it makes them really slow down and it makes things really obvious. So when I'm watching them walk in a straight line, for instance, as they're walking away from me, so if I'm looking at their hind end, I'm looking at, either side of the hip. And I'm looking to see if it's dropping, if things are dropping evenly one side versus another. I'm looking to see if they're stepping through behind, if one side of their haunches are, held to the left versus the right, or if it's straight, if their tail is straight or if it's off to one side. And then as they're walking towards me, I'm kind of using like the points of the shoulders as a reference point because, what you think of as like kind of the side or point of the hips, which is the tuber coxa, and then the point of the shoulders, which is like the point of the humerus. Those are two really big areas for muscles to attach. So you've got some major muscle groups there. So they're great reference points to tell what may be a little bit dysfunctional, what's like not releasing as well. So when I'm looking at the points of the shoulders, I'm looking to see, what does the swing look like? Is one shoulder stepping through more evenly versus another? Does the limb land hard, or do they step all the way through the motion? Does one shoulder drop? Is the neck turned to one side? Is the head tilted at the pole? Or you can kind of see like the nose almost on like a slight diagonal line. Does the rib cage move freely, or is there kind of like a stopping point of motion from the hind end forward through the spine? And then I'm also listening to like, what do their footfalls sound like? Because if you listen to enough horses, you get pretty used to hearing even footfalls versus like a slight pause. And then you're like, oh, something's not quite, stepping through there or moving as evenly. So after I watch them walk, I like to, just kind of be aware of what their default posture is like and how they choose to stand. So I'm not going to judge that based on stopping them one time. I'm going to just like tuck that into the back of my head and see, if I start and stop the horse 3 times, for example, where are they defaulting to? Where are they most comfortable? And then from there, I'm going to do like an initial palpation. So starting at the horse's head, before I do any body work at all, I'm going to start at the horse's head and work my way down the neck, in front of the shoulder, behind the shoulder, along the back, along the gluteal muscles, and then down to the hock. And I'm going to do that on both sides and just pay attention to if there's any reactivity. And that may not be, it really depends on the horse. Like the horse may not be showing anything so much in their face, but I might feel something under my hands, or there might be some twitching under my hands. Or I might not feel any twitching, but they're very reactive with their facial expressions. So just paying attention to that. And when I start a session, for instance, a lot of times there will be diagonal pairs of tension. So you might have a right shoulder and left hind end that are tight. So I don't want to go right into whatever is tight on a new horse. I would start then on, if the right shoulder's tight, I'm probably going to start on the left shoulder so that I'm kind of like getting them used to what I'm doing, easing in. I want to make sure that I'm not saving those areas to last either, because if the horse is a little bit impatient and we need to make sure that the session is a little bit shorter, I want to make sure that I cover everything that I need to. So I always cover the full body every single time. But I am also aware of like what their internal clock is like and their time limit, and where I'm going to start, and being mindful of, not jumping into something that's going to be super sensitive.
How long are the sessions usually?
Typically, like I tell new folks to schedule for about an hour and a half. But then the horses that I've been seeing for a while are typically about an hour. The smaller ponies, maybe like 45 minutes sometimes if they're on a routine schedule, but I'd say like an hour on average. But I schedule by the session, not by the hour, so that gives me a little bit of flexibility.
Nice.
Yeah.
Got it. So you mentioned a bunch of like intake questions, like whether you feed it through a hay net or on the ground. Can you share like what do the answers to those indicate to you? Like the hay net versus ground, like what are you learning from that?
So for instance, if a horse is eating out of a hay net regularly, and if I can watch them eat out of the hay net, like I don't have to like set them up for it, but just as I'm kind of coming and going during this like beginning and end of session, if I can be aware of that and kind of observe them, a lot of times, and depending on where the hay net's set up too, like if it's set up in a corner versus like on a wall with space on either side, they're likely, if they're in a corner, they're likely going to be pulling the same direction every single time when they pull hay out of it. So that's going to lead to some tension on one side of the neck versus the other. And then some of them are much more aggressive with their eating out of a net than others. Like some of them seem to get a little bit frustrated, and they'll either pull really hard or they'll pull and they twist at the pole. So things like that can also lead to some tension over time, whether that's up, like for instance, I work on one horse regularly who like always pulls the same direction, is always tight on the right side of his pole, just from how he moves, pulling stuff out of his net. So yeah, was there something else intake question wise that you were?
Yeah, just like, I mean, that's super interesting. Like, is there anything other, like any other tidbits you might learn from intake questions kind of like that?
I mean, saddle fit, tack fit's always huge. Hoof care, how frequently are they being trimmed? Do they have a any sort of imbalances in their feet that they're addressing, those can definitely affect muscle tightness or patterns of movement too. And then, turnout is again another really big one. Are they spending most of the 24-hour period of the day in a stall, or are they out moving for most or all of those 24 hours? Because that's really going to affect how their body feels. So if we can ask those questions and, get to the root cause of what's causing the muscle tightness, then we have, much better chance at not necessarily reversing, but like addressing that and eliminating that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned tack fitting. How can you speak a bit about that and kind of what issues you might see as a result of poorly fitting tack?
Yeah, so it's pretty common. I see a lot of horses who have varying degrees of back tension. And I think, most of my clients, I think, are pretty good about it, but I think a lot of people don't realize quite how frequently we need to be checking our tack and adjusting, like our saddle fit, for instance. Our horses' bodies can change pretty quickly. Like you could have a horse who wasn't in work, 6 or even 3 months ago, but then is now in work and has maybe lost fat and gained muscle, or reversed, has like lost weight. And that's going to change their body shape a lot. So that's going to change how the tack fits, and their comfort level with it, all of those things. You can also have, rider imbalances affect saddle fit and tack fit. For instance, I've had some clients who may have like multiple horses that one person is riding. There's like a pattern of the same things going on with all of the horses, and it may be because the saddles that they're using are all wearing the same way because it's the same rider. So things like that. And then girthiness is another indicator that there's not something fitting quite correctly. You could also have a saddle that fits well but is placed too far forward, and that's going to cause some issues with like your thoracic portion of the trapezius behind the withers, and your back and all of that. So, and then I think the other thing, like bridle and bit fit, is maybe not addressed as frequently as we should be thinking about it, because we tend to focus on just the saddle, but there are a lot of delicate structures and nerves in the face, and little bony landmarks we need to be aware of in the head, that we want to make sure that our bridle's not kind of inhibiting.
Yeah, totally. How about hoof care? You mentioned kind of, you touched on that, but how does hoof care affect the whole body?
Yeah, so it's kind of like if you think of walking in, high heels versus flip-flops, like you're going to feel it in different parts of your body. So if you have like a horse that has a club foot, or kind of like a high-low thing going on, it's going to affect how, you're going to have one shoulder that's tighter than the other, and like the muscles of the thoracic sling, which attach the forelimb to the trunk of the body, are going to be tighter on one side versus another. That's going to affect their balance. And then they have to figure out and compensate all the way up the limb, and then in their body, how are they going to move to make sure that they're moving in a balanced way with imbalanced feet. And then if you have, heels that are underrun or long toes, you're going to have some compensation and tension because their posture is going to be a little bit different. They're going to stand slightly differently. Like you can almost kind of visually like see it if you try to picture what it would do to us if we were on four limbs. If our heels are like, low, it's going to bring our limb a little bit forward. So it's putting a little bit more strain on some different muscle groups there. And then if you have like a toe that's being scuffed, it's not necessarily like things like toes being scuffed or shoes being pulled aren't necessarily a hoof issue. You could have something going on higher up. For instance, if you have a horse that's scuffing a hind toe, you could have tension in the lower end of the biceps femoris, which is one of the hamstring muscles. So the reason for that is that it can't, if it's tight there, it can't release to come forward underneath the body. It's going to scuff the toe instead. Does that make sense?
Yep, totally.
Yeah. And then if you have, for instance, in like the digital flexor muscle of the forelimb, which the superficial and deep flexor tendons run off of, it can be tight as a result of something lower, like an abscess. And that could be like a current or a past abscess. So if you get tight in that muscle, you're also going to have tension in the tendons lower in the limb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have advice for rehabbing post-injury?
I think that varies so much depending on what the injury is. And like big thing is talk to your vet. If you have a vet and a body worker who can collaborate, that's fantastic. I'd say like a theme that I notice with rehab, at least in my area, is that there seems to be kind of like this standard protocol for rehabbing from a multitude of injuries. And that's kind of following the plan of like, we walk for a while and then we walk under saddle and then we trot and then we add a couple of minutes of trotting here and there. We, trot on the long side, walk in the corners. And that's kind of how it goes. I would love to see more rehab plans that focus on building up strength on the ground before we even sit on the horse again. So building up postural strength and core strength, so that then when we get back on their backs, we have a stronger base that we're sitting on. So we're not just increasing their, cardio strength, but we're increasing their postural strength as well.
What kind of things can you do to increase postural strength and core strength?
You can do things like belly lifts on the ground, carrot stretches, pull work exercises, again, on the ground before we add the weight of a rider, raised pulls, typically like the slower you go and the higher they are, for pull exercises, the more difficult it's going to be. So, when I teach clinics with pull exercises or stretches, I typically tell folks, the more boring it seems to us, the more effective it probably is. So just, slowing down and really taking the time to do those exercises. And that doesn't mean just doing them for like a week, but integrating it into part of a horse's routine.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah is asking about lower back pain in horses. She's asking how to identify the source based on where they are showing signs of tenderness. And she said some horses will palpate tender, but after some light lunging work, warm up out of their soreness. Mm-hmm. Should we be riding these horses in this circumstance? Where is the line on when to ride if they warm up out of it and when not to? She said backs are kept in good condition through movement. What are your go-to? This is a lot of questions. What are your go-to movements for horses with sore backs? Okay, let's start with just lower back pain, how to identify the source based on where they're showing signs of tenderness.
Yeah, so the big question is, what's the cause of the back pain? So we don't want to be doing anything that could exacerbate the issue. So is there low back pain because there's a saddle fit issue? Is there low back pain because they're, compensating somewhere else? Is there low back pain because the rider has low back pain and they're tense in their low back when they ride? Is there something going on like kissing spines? So we'd want to rule out, or try to figure out what the cause is before we can really say whether or not the exercise and warming them up like that is helping. But typically, the more we can strengthen the core, it's just like us. Those core exercises that nobody wants to do, the more we can strengthen the core, the stronger the low back is going to be and the more support the low back is going to be. So doing things like those carrot stretches, belly lifts, pole work, but I can't really say whether or not movement and lunging would be good without knowing the cause. Were there other questions there that I missed?
A lot. There's a lot. No, not that you missed. Not that you missed, but there's a lot more questions. Follow up. Okay, so if they do warm up out of it, what is your general thought? Like, it's okay. Like, I mean, I guess I don't know how you can really say. But is that a different type of back pain?
Yeah. So personally, if I have a horse that has back pain, I'm not going to say that that's okay to ride. I want to not see that back pain without a rider before I add a rider, regardless of whether or not they warm up out of it. Like, I don't want to be seeing that at all. Even if they warm up out of it on a lunge, I'm not going to stick the weight of a rider on it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Can body work and equine massage be helpful with kissing spine?
Yeah, it can be, as you address kissing spines and kind of like go along a plan with your vet, it can be really helpful for basically like interrupting those long-term patterns of like splinting in those areas that are affected or sore. So with horses that have kissing spines, typically, say I'm to work on them, even if it's on a super frequent basis, but the kissing spines aren't addressed or there isn't anything else being done to help support the horse. Every single time I go and see that horse, they're probably going to have really, really tight muscles bilaterally on either side of their spine. So we need to be doing body work in conjunction with other things to help support that area. And again, like tying back into the core strength, building up the core so that they can, if you think of like the kissing spines, the spinous processes rubbing together, if the back is hollow, they're rubbing together more. But if we can increase that core strength and lift the belly and lift the spine, we're going to open up that space between those spinous processes. But yes, we also want to help, decrease muscle tension that is around that area. Because when things are sore, the body will be tight and act as like a splint around that sore spot.
Yeah, it's I think that's a really great explanation. Sarah's also asking if massage guns are a waste of time and or money.
I think they need to be used really carefully. I personally don't use them, and that's because coming from the human background and having used them on myself and with people, I actually bought a massage gun a couple years ago thinking like, oh, I'm going to play with this with my own horses. I never touched my own horses with it. And that's because, I saw with human practice, like people are sensitive in different ways. For instance, like I'm typically someone who gets pretty deep body work when I get worked on, but I cannot tolerate a massage gun. It bruises the heck out of me. And horses can't like speak up and say that. Like it might feel okay in the moment, but you also can't really see like a bruise on them. So I don't want to make them sore. So that's number one reason why I don't use it. The next reason, which is honestly equally as important, is I don't feel comfortable recommending owners use them because there are just so many like bony prominences on the horse that can be really, really painful to hit. So I'd say if you're going to use one, the safest area to do it is like on the gluteal muscles because it's such a big area of muscle tissue. And then you're avoiding like the tubercoxa, the point of the hip, and then up by the spine. So you're not touching those areas. You're just going in between there. But overall, I personally would much rather, pay a body worker than do something that might make my horse sore.
Yeah, it definitely seems risky. I have one too, and I'm just like, it does hurt a lot.
Yeah,
like if you hit like a tight muscle, it's like, oh my god,
and you hurts more than it should. Go from being like, oh, that feels so good to like, oh my god, that was really painful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really a really fair reasoning for staying away from them. Do you have any favorites? Like you mentioned like carrot stretches. Do you have any favorite stretches that you think that people can just be doing? Like if their horse doesn't necessarily have like a certain issue, but like it's just great for horse's well-being?
I mean, I think carrot stretches are great for that, just as like a general, you know, if we're going to pick one thing, because it's pretty hard to do wrong for starters. Like you can do a lot of different carrot stretches in different areas and positions, and it can help really increase the mobility of the back as well as the posture, depending on where you're having that horse stretch to. I'd say, you know, if you're wanting to integrate stretches into your routine, if you can like pick, like set yourself up for success. If you can pick 2 or 3 things that you're really comfortable doing and you can do routinely, work that into your schedule. So, you know, you don't have to like make a separate time in your day for stretching. Like do it in a way that works for you and your horse. For instance, like if you're going to give them a treat anyway, why not just ask them to turn their head a little bit farther and stretch, or stand next to them, have them, you know, stretch around you, because you're going to be giving that. It doesn't take any more time. And just, you know, hold it for 10 seconds or so. If you're going to pick out their feet after a ride when they're already warmed up, do a little bit of a leg stretch then when you're already holding the limb. Like we have these opportunities in our day anyway with our horses. We don't have to, you know, put a lot of pressure on ourselves to make separate yoga time.
Yeah. Is it better to do that stretching before or after a ride? I know like with humans, like a recent thing is like you should only be doing dynamic stretches before you work out and not static stretches. Is that like stuff like that apply to horses too?
Yeah, you definitely want to do stretches after riding. Carrot stretches are a little bit more flexible. You can do them, you know, at different times. But any stretching of the limbs, you definitely want to do after riding or warming up.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Caitlin is asking, what do you recommend your clients be doing in between their bodywork sessions?
I love that question. So typically, like, I will always give recommendations to my clients for like some exercises they can be doing in between. So that might be stretches, or it might be specific exercises, like, you know, and making sure that like my clients understand how to do it and do it correctly and are comfortable doing it. But that may be like a very specific type of pull work exercise. Or your homework might be to get the saddle fitter out. So those are the things that will help the body work, you know, kind of stick, and then we'll get to peel back the layers and like kind of go step by step, and hopefully address new things the next time and not the same thing over and over. So I guess the answer would be like, ask your body worker what the recommendations are for your horse and focus again on like 2 or 3 things so that you know what's working. Like you don't want to throw the kitchen sink at them because then you don't know what was working best. But if you can focus on a couple of exercises in between sessions, that's great feedback for you and for your body worker.
Totally. What is your general like frequency of appointments with your clients? Do you have like a rule of thumb?
So typically, like if I'm seeing a new client, and there's some long-standing, you know, muscle tightness going on, I may see that horse, you know, I've found my average to be like, I may see that horse like 3 times more back to back. So that might be like, I might do session 1 week, session 2 the next, and then do 2 weeks in between the second and the third. Or I might do like 2 weeks in between each of those, like 2 weeks in between the first and the second, third. I typically find that after that third session, we have a pretty good idea of like where to go, what some of the causes might be, so how we might address that, and then we can start spreading it out, and seeing how they hold the body work in between. So I'd say right now the majority of my personal clients are on about a monthly schedule. Some are a little bit more, some are a little bit less, but on average about a monthly schedule.
Yeah, that's manageable. It's better than you
Yeah.
being like every other day. It's like,
Yeah,
okay.
no.
Do you have any like memorable success stories or a single memorable success stories where your massage therapy significantly improved a horse's performance or well-being that you might be able to share?
I mean, it's so hard because as soon as you start asking that, it's like all the stories start going through. I'm like, oh, this was cool. This is cool. I mean, I love whenever my clients will like, text me a couple days later and be like, oh my God, they felt amazing. Oh my God, we picked up this lead, or, they were so much more balanced over fences, or more relaxed. Or I had a client with an older mare who, she was having a really hard time, was honestly like sleep deprived because she wasn't able to lie down comfortably. And she texted me, I think it was like the 1 or 2 days after the session. She's like, she's been able to lie down and sleep. And that is like the most rewarding thing I could ask for. When they're more comfortable in their body and can just like be horses and do the things that we ask of them more comfortably. Yeah.
That's a really nice story.
Yeah.
I'm sure her owner was so relieved to see
she
that.
was
And I'm sure
so
she was
happy. Yeah. And she said she was eating better too, which was awesome because, it's like I think like 27, 28-year-old mare. So she was like, oh, she's not eating well. She's not able to sleep. Like, I don't know how things are going to go. And then she started eating and sleeping. So,
oh my gosh, that warms my heart. That makes me so happy. You just don't want him to be in pain. It's just so nice when you can relieve that. What are your do you have future goals in continuing to develop your practice and expertise in equine bodywork? Like where would you love to see this go?
So I have a lot of things I'm really excited about right now. And yeah, so right now I have a trip planned to Colorado in October for work, for about a week. And that's kind of like my test run trip to see if I want to be out there for a good chunk of next summer. So before my clients hear this and like panic, I've already announced it on social media, but if that were to happen, what I would do would be like fly back, every 4 to 6 weeks and like have a 5 to 7 day period that I'm keeping all my folks on a regular schedule here. But I would love to be able to go out there seasonally, and, develop some sort of client base there, as well as, learn more about, oh, can you hear me? Okay. For some reason on my computer, It just said that the AirPods connected there. So I just wanted to make sure.
No, all good.
So I would love to, learn more about disciplines that I'm not as familiar with that are out in the Western states, and learn from folks out there and kind of develop some sort of community and client base. It's a little tricky because I've spent my whole life in New England and I'm relying on like people who know people to get out there, but I've had a really, really positive experience so far making connections. So I'm really looking forward to that trip this fall. And then as far as continuing ed stuff goes, I'm wrapping up my case studies for a kinesiology tape certification now. What else do I've like signed up for so many continuing ed things that I need to like actually check and see what I like still have to do, because I'm like, at different parts in all of them. Totally. And then I'm attending a dissection in October as well. So that'll be over a 3-day period. And that'll be in person. So
very cool.
Yeah.
It's a lot to look forward to.
Yeah.
Rebecca, where can people find you? Like if they want to work with you, if they want to learn from you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
So I am on social media. I'm not like, I check it regularly. I'm not like the most exceptional at posting on social media, but I use it for networking. So they can find my Facebook and Instagram. It's Elite Equine Massage LLC on both. And then they can also find me through my website, which is the same. It's eliteequinemassageLLC.com. Email, all the things are the same. Email's the same. It's all, lengthy because you have to like add it all in there because every other name's taken. But yeah, folks are welcome to reach out, like messaging on social media or, finding my number on the website or email. I do check all of those things regularly.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure you'll definitely have people taking you up on that after this session. We really appreciate you taking the time and just sharing your knowledge with us and putting in terms that I can understand. I only had to Google that one term, so I consider that a win.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And everybody who attended live, thank you. And thanks for sticking through my audio issues at the beginning. I'm glad that we got that resolved. So have a wonderful evening, everyone. And we'll actually, it's worth me announcing, we are doing a bonus episode of Ask an Expert this week. Jessa is going to join me on Thursday to celebrate the 3rd anniversary of Red IQ. So
awesome.
Tune in for that, everybody. And then we'll be back to regular scheduled programming next week with a video review with John. So thank you so much, Rebecca. This was an absolute blast. And have a wonderful evening, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye, guys.
Bye.